The mess hall buzzed with the usual chatter of off-duty Marines, their voices mixing with the clatter of metal trays and the hiss of the coffee machines. Lieutenant Sarah Chen sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her protein ration while reviewing tactical reports on her datapad. The harsh fluorescent lights cast sharp shadows across her face, highlighting the network of scars that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, jagged lines that told a story most people preferred not to hear. "Look at Frankenstein over there," whispered Corporal Jake Morrison to his buddies at the next table. "Still trying to pretend she belongs with real soldiers," his friend snickered. "I heard she got those scars running away from the enemy, tripped over her own feet and fell face first into some debris." Sarah's grip tightened on her spoon, but she didn't look up. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The scars were a reminder of the worst day of her life, but also of her greatest triumph, though no one seemed interested in hearing that part of the story. The Terran Defense Force had been humanity's answer to the growing threat from the Catherian Empire, a collection of alien species that viewed humans as primitive upstarts unworthy of space travel. When first contact had been made 3 years ago, the aliens had laughed at human military capabilities. Their technology was centuries ahead, their warriors bred for combat, their ships capable of reducing entire planets to ash. But humans had something the Catherians didn't understand: an absolute refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds. Sarah had enlisted the day after the first Catherian attack on Proxima Colony. She had watched the news feeds of the devastation, seen the footage of alien warriors casually executing human civilians, and knew that every able-bodied human needed to stand up and fight. Her parents had begged her to reconsider. She was brilliant, had been accepted to the Mars Engineering Institute, had a bright future ahead of her. Instead, she chose the infantry. The training had been brutal. The instructors pushed every recruit to their breaking point and beyond, knowing that the enemy they would face showed no mercy to the weak. Sarah excelled in tactics and marksmanship, but her slight build made her a target for ridicule among the larger, more traditionally imposing Marines. "Chen's too small to carry a proper rifle," one instructor had joked during a training exercise. "Maybe we should give her a slingshot instead." She had proven them wrong by outscoring every other recruit in the marksmanship trials, but the jokes continued. They called her Pixie and Little Sister, and made comments about needing to protect her when they reached the front lines. Sarah endured it all with quiet determination, knowing that actions spoke louder than words. Her first deployment had been to Kepler 442b, a mining world that the Catherians had targeted for its rare Earth deposits. The enemy had sent a small, scouting force to test human defenses, expecting easy resistance. Instead, they found 3 battalions of Terran Marines dug in and ready for a fight. The battle had lasted 18 hours. The Catherians had superior weapons and armor, but they fought like machines, predictable, methodical, following established patterns. The humans fought like wild animals backed into a corner, using every dirty trick and desperate tactic they could think of. Sarah had distinguished herself in that first engagement, leading a squad through enemy lines to sabotage their communication array. Her small size had been an advantage, allowing her to slip through gaps in their perimeter that larger Marines couldn't navigate. When her squad had been pinned down by enemy fire, she had crawled 200 meters through electrified razor wire to reach the target, ignoring the cuts and burns that would later become infected and leave permanent scars. But that wasn't the battle that had given her the marks on her face. That had come later, during the defense of Haven Station. The Catherians had sent a full battle fleet, determined to crush human resistance once and for all. They had new weapons, adapted tactics, and a burning desire for revenge after their earlier defeats. The station had been evacuated except for essential personnel and the Marine garrison. 2,000 humans against 50,000 aliens, with nowhere to run and no hope of reinforcement. Command had written them off as a necessary sacrifice to buy time for the evacuation of core worlds. The Marines had other ideas. "Remember," their commander had said during the final briefing, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every human who's ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of touching them. The enemy thinks we're nothing but primitive animals. Let's show them what this animal can do when it's protecting its young. The first wave of attackers had been repelled with minimal casualties. The Catherians had expected the humans to fold quickly, and their initial assault had been almost casual. When the second wave arrived with heavy weapons and siege equipment, the real battle began. Sarah had been assigned to Delta Company, tasked with holding the eastern docking bay. It was considered a secondary target, likely to see light resistance while the enemy focused on the main command centers. Instead, it became the site of the bloodiest fighting of the entire siege. The Catherians had sent their elite shock troops through that sector, intending to flank the main defensive line. They moved like shadows through the maintenance tunnels, their adaptive camouflage making them nearly invisible until they struck. Delta Company found themselves facing enemies that could bend light around their bodies and weapons that fired coherent plasma at relativistic speeds. Fall back to secondary positions. Captain Rodriguez had shouted over the screaming of energy weapons and dying Marines. We can't hold this line. But falling back meant abandoning the evacuation shuttles that were still docked in the bay. 300 civilian engineers and their families were trapped aboard those ships, unable to launch while the docking clamps were engaged. Someone had to reach the control station and manually release them. The control station was 200 meters away, across open ground swept by enemy fire. Any Marine who tried to reach it would be cut down in seconds. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. Sarah had looked at the trapped shuttles, at the faces pressed against the viewports, and made her choice. She grabbed a smoke grenade and a plasma cutter and started running. The smoke grenade detonated halfway across the docking bay, creating a thick gray cloud that confused the Catherian targeting systems for precious seconds. Sarah sprinted through the haze, feeling the heat of plasma bolts searing the air inches from her body. Her lungs burned as she pushed herself harder than she had ever pushed before, knowing that every second of delay meant more civilian deaths. A plasma bolt caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her tumbling across the metal decking. The pain was incredible, like being struck by lightning and burned by molten steel at the same time. Her left arm hung useless at her side, but she forced herself back to her feet and kept running. The control station was just ahead, its emergency lights blinking red in the smoky darkness. Sarah could hear the Catherian warriors pursuing her, their heavy footsteps echoing off the bulkheads as they closed the distance. She reached the console and began frantically working the release mechanism with her good hand, her fingers flying over the controls as enemy fire sparked off the metal housing around her. The first docking clamp released with a satisfying thunk, then the second. But the third clamp was damaged, its mechanism jammed by battle debris. Sarah pulled out the plasma cutter and began working on the twisted metal, knowing that the Catherians would reach her position in seconds. Come on, she whispered, sweat and blood dripping onto the control panel as she worked. The plasma cutter sliced through the obstruction, and the final clamp released just as the first Catherian rounded the corner. The alien warrior was 7 feet tall, its body covered in biomechanical armor that pulsed with internal energy. Its weapon was already trained on Sarah's position, the barrel glowing with contained plasma. She had no cover, no way to escape, and no weapon that could penetrate its armor. But she had accomplished her mission. The evacuation shuttles were launching, carrying 300 innocent people to safety. As the Catherian's finger tightened on the trigger, Sarah felt a moment of perfect peace. The plasma bolt never came. Instead, there was a deafening roar as Captain Rodriguez and the survivors of Delta Company came charging through the smoke, their weapons blazing. The Catherian warrior spun to face this new threat, giving Sarah the opening she needed to roll behind the control console. The battle that followed was short but vicious. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with the desperate fury of cornered animals. Rodriguez emptied his entire power pack into the lead Catherian, punching through its armor at point-blank range. Sergeant Williams tackled another warrior and detonated a grenade, taking them both out in a flash of white-hot plasma. When the smoke cleared, only 5 Marines were still standing. The rest lay scattered across the docking bay, their bodies testament to the price of human courage. Sarah was among the survivors, though barely. The Catherian plasma bolt had burned through her shoulder and neck, leaving her face a mess of charred flesh and exposed bone. The medics had done what they could, but field surgery in the middle of a battle zone had its limitations. The scars would be permanent, they told her, She might need reconstructive surgery once they reached a proper medical facility. There could be nerve damage, reduced mobility, chronic pain. Sarah had told them to patch her up and get her back to the fight. The defense of Haven Station had lasted another 6 days. The Catherians threw wave after wave of troops at the human positions, expecting each assault to be the one that finally broke their resistance. Instead, they found Marines who refused to yield a single meter of ground, who turned every corridor into a killing field and every room into a fortress. The aliens had superior technology, but the humans had something that couldn't be manufactured or programmed: absolute, unshakable determination. They fought for their families, their homes, their species' right to exist among the stars. Every Marine who fell was replaced by another who was just as willing to die for the cause. On the 7th day, the Catherian commander made a mistake. Frustrated by his force's inability to break the human defense, he ordered a direct assault on the main command center with his entire remaining force. The humans let them come, drawing them into carefully prepared kill zones where superior numbers meant nothing. The battle for the command center lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the Catherian fleet was in full retreat, leaving behind nearly 30,000 dead warriors and the wreckage of a dozen assault ships. The humans had lost 1,800 Marines, but they had accomplished something that many thought impossible. They had defeated a Catherian battle fleet in direct combat. The victory at Haven Station changed everything. Word spread throughout human space that the aliens could be beaten, that their technology and tactics were not invincible. Recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers eager to join the fight. The Terran Defense Force grew from a desperate militia into a proper military force capable of taking the war to the enemy. But for Sarah, returning to normal life proved harder than fighting aliens. The scars were obvious and ugly, drawing stares and whispers wherever she went. People who didn't know her assumed she was a victim rather than a hero. Those who did know her story often seemed uncomfortable around her, as if her disfigurement reminded them of the cost of their freedom. The worst part was the way her fellow Marines treated her. Some were respectful, even admiring of what she had accomplished, but others seemed to see her scars as a sign of weakness, evidence that she had somehow failed in her duty. The jokes and whispers followed her from base to base, assignment to assignment. Frankenstein's monster, they called her, the walking corpse. Half-faced Chen. She endured it all with the same quiet determination that had carried her across that docking bay. She knew what she had done, what she had sacrificed, and why it mattered. The opinions of small-minded people couldn't change that. But sometimes, late at night when the pain in her face kept her awake, she wondered if it had all been worth it. She wondered if saving those 300 civilians had been worth becoming a monster in the eyes of her own people. Today, sitting in the mess hall while her fellow Marines made jokes about her appearance, she found herself wondering again. The laughter from Morrison's table grew louder, and Sarah finally looked up from her datapad. The corporal was making exaggerated gestures, apparently demonstrating what he imagined had been her cowardly retreat from battle. His friends were eating it up, slapping their knees and wiping tears from their eyes. And then, Morrison continued in a high-pitched voice meant to mock her. She probably screamed like a little girl and ran straight into a bulkhead. That's how you get scars like that. Pure stupidity and cowardice. Morrison. The voice was quiet but carried an edge that made everyone in the immediate area fall silent. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez stood behind the corporal's chair, her expression calm but her eyes hard as flint. "You got something you want to share with the rest of us?" Morrison's smile faltered. Vasquez was a 20-year veteran with 3 Purple Hearts and a reputation for not tolerating fools. She was also one of the few Marines who had been at Haven Station and knew exactly how Sarah had earned her scars. "Just having a laugh, Sergeant," Morrison said, trying to recover his composure. "No harm meant. No harm," Vasquez repeated slowly. "You think making jokes about a fellow Marine's battle wounds is harmless?" "Battle wounds?" Morrison's voice dripped with skepticism. "Come on, Sergeant. Look at her. You really think someone that small could have done anything heroic enough to earn scars like that?" Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, studying Morrison with the same intensity she might use to examine a particularly disgusting species of alien parasite. "You know what I think, Corporal? I think you're exactly the kind of Marine who gives the rest of us a bad name. The kind who talks tough in the mess hall but pisses himself when the shooting starts. Morrison's face flushed red. Hey now, that's not fair. I've seen action. I was in the Vega system when you spent 3 days hiding in a supply closet while the rest of your unit held the line, Vasquez finished. Yeah, I read your service record. Real inspiring stuff. The mess hall had gone completely quiet now. Everyone was watching the confrontation. Some with obvious enjoyment at seeing Morrison taken down a peg. Others with uncomfortable expressions as they realized they might have been just as guilty of similar behavior. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. She appreciated Vasquez standing up for her, but she had learned to fight her own battles. It's okay, Sergeant, she said quietly. I can handle this. Vasquez glanced at her and nodded. I know you can, Lieutenant, but sometimes people need to hear the truth whether they want to or not. She turned back to Morrison. You want to know how she got those scars? She got them saving 300 civilians while under heavy enemy fire. She crossed 200 meters of open ground with plasma bolts flying past her head, released docking clamps with a damage control system, and held her position until evacuation shuttles could launch. Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That's not what I heard. What you heard, Vasquez said with disgust, was gossip from idiots who weren't there. I was there, Corporal. I was part of the quick reaction force that tried to reach her position. We couldn't get through the enemy fire. She did what none of us could do, and she did it knowing she probably wouldn't survive. The silence stretched on as Morrison struggled to find a response. Finally, he mumbled something about not knowing the full story and turned back to his meal. His friends followed suit, suddenly very interested in their protein rations. Vasquez walked over to Sarah's table and sat down across from her. Mind if I join you, Lieutenant? Of course not, Sergeant. Sarah was grateful for the company, though she wished it hadn't come about this way. Thanks for what you did back there, but you didn't have to. Yes, I did, Vasquez interrupted. I've been watching this garbage go on for months, and I'm sick of it. These kids have no idea what real combat looks like, what it takes to make the hard choices under fire. They think war is a video game where you respawn if you get killed. Sarah nodded slowly. Most of them have never faced the Catherians in a real battle. The recent conflicts have been mostly border skirmishes and patrol actions. They haven't seen what those aliens can do when they're really trying to kill you. Exactly. And God willing, they never will. But that doesn't give them the right to mock someone who has. Vasquez took a sip of her coffee and grimaced. Jesus, this stuff gets worse every day. You'd think with all our advanced technology we could make decent coffee. The attempt at humor made Sarah smile for the first time all day. I think terrible coffee is a military tradition dating back centuries. Some things never change. True enough. Vasquez studied Sarah's face for a moment, not flinching at the scars like so many others did. Can I ask you something personal, Lieutenant? Sure. Do you ever regret it? The choice you made at Haven Station? It was a question Sarah had asked herself countless times, especially during the long nights when the nerve damage in her face made sleep impossible. Sometimes, she admitted. Not because I saved those people, I'd do that again in a heartbeat. But sometimes I wonder if it was worth becoming this. She gestured at her scarred face. You know what I see when I look at you? Vasquez asked. A monster? A hero. Someone who was willing to sacrifice everything for people she'd never met, who didn't even know her name. Do you know how rare that is? How many people talk about honor and duty and sacrifice, but when the moment comes, they find an excuse to let someone else pay the price. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels like I lost something important that day, like the person I was before died in that docking bay, and what came back was just broken. You're not broken, Vasquez said firmly. You're different, changed. But so is everyone who's seen real combat. The scars on your face are just more visible than most people's wounds. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, finishing their meals and watching the ebb and flow of Marines coming and going. The mess hall had returned to its normal volume of conversation, though Sarah noticed several people glancing in her direction with what might have been newfound respect. Sergeant, Sarah said eventually, what's the word on our next deployment? I heard rumors we might be shipping out soon. Vasquez nodded. Official announcement comes tomorrow, but we're headed for the Altair system. Intelligence reports suggest the Catherians are massing forces there for a major offensive. Could be the biggest battle since Haven Station. Sarah felt a familiar mixture of fear and anticipation. Despite everything that had happened to her, despite the scars and the pain and the nightmares, she still felt the call of duty. There were people who needed protecting, and she was still a Marine. Good, she said quietly. It's time we reminded them what happens when they threaten human space. Vasquez smiled grimly. Couldn't agree more, Lieutenant. Couldn't agree more. The transport ship TDF Indomitable dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Altair system 3 days later, its hull scarred from previous battles, and its crew ready for another fight. Sarah stood in the observation deck, watching the distant star grow larger as they approached their destination. Around her, other Marines pressed against the viewports, some excited for their first major engagement, others grimly preparing for what they knew would be a brutal fight. First time seeing a Catherian battle fleet? Asked Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a recent Academy graduate who had been assigned to Sarah's platoon. He was young, eager, and unfortunately prone to asking questions that revealed his complete lack of combat experience. No, Sarah replied without taking her eyes off the view, but it never gets easier. Webb followed her gaze and whistled low. The Catherian fleet was massive, easily 200 ships arranged in perfect geometric formation around Altair 4, a mining world that produced the rare elements needed for faster-than-light travel. The alien vessels were works of art as much as instruments of war, their organic curves and bioluminescent hulls making them look more like deep-sea creatures than spacecraft. They're beautiful in their own way, aren't they? Webb said. Hard to believe something so elegant could be so deadly. Sarah finally turned to look at him, noting the way his eyes widened slightly when he saw her scars up close. Beauty doesn't matter when they're trying to kill you, Lieutenant. Those ships carry enough firepower to reduce a planet to slag. Each warrior aboard them is genetically enhanced for combat and absolutely convinced that humans are vermin that need to be exterminated. Right, of course. Webb cleared his throat nervously. I just meant, I know what you meant. Sarah's voice softened slightly. But you need to put those thoughts aside. The moment you start thinking of the enemy as anything other than a threat to be eliminated, you're dead. And worse, you might get your Marines killed too. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All personnel to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat. All personnel to battle stations. The observation deck emptied quickly as Marines hurried to their assigned positions. Sarah made her way to the armory where her platoon was already assembling, checking weapons and equipment with the methodical precision of soldiers who had done this many times before. All right, listen up, she called out as she entered the compartment. Intelligence reports indicate the Catherians have been fortifying Altair 4 for the past 6 months. They've got ground-based plasma cannons, orbital defense platforms, and approximately 50,000 troops dug in around the primary mining complex. Corporal Davis, one of her squad leaders, raised his hand. What's our objective, Lieutenant? We're part of the third wave assault on the northern continent. Our job is to secure Landing Zone Charlie and hold it long enough for the heavy equipment to come down. Once we're planetside, we push toward the mining complex and link up with the other assault forces. What about air support? Asked Private Martinez, Limited. The Catherians have excellent anti-aircraft capabilities, so we'll be mostly on our own until the fleet can suppress their air defenses. Sarah looked around the room, studying the faces of her Marines. Some she had served with before, veterans who knew what they were getting into. Others were young recruits who had never faced the Catherians in battle. I'm not going to lie to you, she continued. This is going to be rough. The enemy knows we're coming. They've had months to prepare, and they're not going to give up easily. Some of us probably won't make it home. But remember why we're here. That mining operation produces 60% of the rare earth elements needed for human FTL drives. If we lose it, we lose our ability to move between star systems. The war ends and humanity becomes extinct. The Marines nodded grimly. They all understood the stakes. Equipment check in 5 minutes, Sarah ordered. I want every weapon cleaned and charged, every piece of gear secured. When we hit that landing zone, I want us ready to fight from the moment our boots touch dirt. As her platoon dispersed to prepare their gear, Sarah noticed Morrison and his friends in the corner of the armory. The corporal was being unusually quiet, his earlier bravado replaced by obvious nervousness. She made her way over to him. You ready for this, Morrison? She asked. He looked up, startled. Lieutenant, Yes, ma'am. Ready as anyone can be. Sarah studied him for a moment. Despite their encounter in the mess hall, she was still responsible for every Marine in her platoon, including him. You've never fought the Catherians before, have you? No, ma'am. My unit was in the Vega system, but we mostly dealt with pirate raiders and smugglers. The Catherians are different, she said quietly. They're faster, stronger, and smarter than anything you've faced before. They don't make mistakes, they don't panic, and they absolutely will not stop until you're dead, or they are. Morrison swallowed hard. Any advice, Lieutenant? Sarah considered the question. Part of her wanted to let him figure it out on his own after the way he had treated her. But her duty as an officer overrode her personal feelings. Stay close to your squad. Don't try to be a hero. Leave that to the idiots who want to die young. And remember that the Marine next to you is counting on you to do your job, just like you're counting on them. What about you, Lieutenant? Any special tactics for fighting aliens? Yeah, Sarah said, touching the scars on her face unconsciously. When they try to kill you, kill them first. The Indomitable shuddered as enemy fire began impacting its shields. Through the armory's viewport, Sarah could see the bright flashes of naval combat as the human fleet engaged the Catherian forces. Plasma beams lanced through space like deadly lightning, and occasionally a ship would disappear in a ball of superheated gas. First wave away, came the announcement over the intercom. Second wave launching in 30 minutes. Sarah began checking her own equipment, pulse rifle charged and ready, sidearm secured, ammunition properly distributed. She had done this hundreds of times before, but the routine helped calm her nerves. Combat was chaotic and unpredictable, but preparation was something she could control. Lieutenant Chen, report to the briefing room immediately. She looked up at the intercom speaker, surprised. Last-minute briefings usually meant changes to the mission plan, and changes were rarely good news. Davis, you're in charge until I get back, she called to her senior squad leader. Keep them busy with equipment checks. The briefing room was crowded with platoon leaders and company commanders, all studying holographic displays of the landing zone and surrounding terrain. Major Harrison, the battalion commander, stood at the front of the room looking grim. We've got a problem, he announced without preamble. Reconnaissance drones have identified a new Catherian weapon system near landing zone Charlie. It appears to be some kind of directed energy array capable of taking out our dropships before they can land. Sarah felt her stomach sink. Without air support, the assault would turn into a massacre. What are our options, sir? Asked Captain Rodriguez. Limited. We can't approach the landing zone until that weapon is neutralized, but we can't neutralize it without getting close enough to attack it. Harrison paused, studying the tactical display. However, there might be a way. Major Harrison manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on a section of rocky terrain about 5 kilometers from the weapon emplacement. There's a maintenance tunnel system here that was carved out by the original mining survey teams. It's narrow, barely wide enough for a single person, but it leads directly under the Catherian position. Sarah studied the route carefully. What's the catch, sir? The tunnel is partially collapsed in several places. It would take someone small and agile to navigate through the debris. And once they're in position, they'd have to place charges on the weapon's power coupling and get out before the entire system comes down on their head. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. It was a suicide mission disguised as a tactical strike, the kind of operation that looked good on paper but usually ended with a hero's funeral. I'll do it, Sarah said without hesitation. Harrison nodded as if he had expected her volunteer. I hoped you'd say that, Lieutenant. Your service record at Haven Station suggests you're exactly the kind of Marine we need for this job. When do I leave? Immediately. A stealth shuttle will drop you at coordinates Alpha 7, about 2 kilometers from the tunnel entrance. You'll have to approach on foot to avoid detection. Harrison handed her a data pad with detailed schematics. The charges are already prepared, enough explosive to take out the weapon and probably half the mountainside it's built into. Sarah reviewed the mission parameters quickly. The plan was simple in concept but terrifyingly complex in execution. She would have to infiltrate an enemy-controlled area, navigate through unstable tunnels, plant explosives under a heavily guarded alien weapon, and somehow escape before the detonation brought down several tons of rock and metal. Questions? Harrison asked. Just one, sir. What's the extraction plan? Harrison's expression grew even grimmer. There isn't one. The explosion will be visible from orbit. Every Catherian in the area will know exactly where you are. Your best chance is to go to ground and wait for the main assault force to reach your position. In other words, she was on her own. Sarah nodded calmly, though her heart was racing. Understood, sir. When do I leave? 10 minutes. The shuttle is being prepped now. Harrison clasped her shoulder briefly. Good luck, Lieutenant. The success of the entire operation depends on this mission. Sarah returned to the armory to collect her gear and brief her platoon. Davis would take command in her absence with orders to integrate with Captain Rodriguez's company once they reached the surface. She kept the explanation brief. There was a special mission that required her unique skills, and she would rejoin them once it was complete. Morrison approached her as she was checking her equipment one final time. Lieutenant, I wanted to say something before you go. She looked up, surprised by the serious tone in his voice. What is it, Corporal? I was wrong about you. About what I said in the mess hall. Sergeant Vasquez told us what really happened at Haven Station, and I'm sorry. I had no right to mock your scars without knowing how you got them. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or manipulation. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and something that might have been respect. Apology accepted, Morrison. Just remember that every Marine has a story, and most of those stories involve more courage than you might expect. Yes, ma'am. And Lieutenant, come back safe. The platoon needs you. The stealth shuttle was a sleek black craft designed for infiltration missions. Its hull coated with materials that absorbed sensor radiation and made it nearly invisible to enemy detection systems. Sarah strapped herself into the single passenger seat as the pilot initiated launch sequence. Dropping you at the coordinates in 15 minutes, the pilot informed her through the intercom. Weather is clear, but there's significant enemy patrol activity in the area. You'll need to move fast and stay low. Sarah reviewed the mission data one more time, memorizing every detail of the tunnel system and the weapon emplacement. The Catherian Directed Energy Array was a massive structure, built into the side of a mountain and powered by geothermal taps that reached deep into the planet's core. Destroying it would require placing charges at precisely the right locations to cause a cascade failure. The shuttle began its descent, weaving between mountain peaks to avoid enemy sensors. Through the small viewport, Sarah could see the alien installation in the distance, a collection of organic curves and bioluminescent panels that looked like a cancer growing on the mountainside. 30 seconds to drop, the pilot announced. Remember, I can't wait around. Once you're on the ground, you're committed. Understood. Sarah checked her weapons one final time and activated her personal stealth field. The device would bend light around her body for short periods, making her nearly invisible to optical sensors. But it drained power quickly and was useless against thermal or motion detection. The shuttle settled onto a rocky outcropping with barely a whisper of sound. Sarah grabbed her pack and weapons and slipped out through the rear hatch, immediately dropping to a crouch and scanning the surrounding terrain. The shuttle lifted off behind her, disappearing into the night sky within seconds. She was alone on an alien world, surrounded by enemies who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her presence. The familiar mixture of fear and determination settled over her as she began moving toward the tunnel entrance. The approach took an hour, crawling through rocky terrain while avoiding Catherian patrol routes. The aliens moved in groups of 3, their biomechanical armor allowing them to traverse difficult terrain with ease. Sarah had to hide twice as patrols passed within meters of her position, holding her breath while their thermal sensors swept the area. The tunnel entrance was concealed behind a rockfall that had occurred during the initial Catherian bombardment. Sarah had to move several large stones to create an opening wide enough for her body, working carefully to avoid making noise that might alert nearby patrols. The tunnel was even smaller than the intelligence reports had suggested. Sarah had to crawl on her hands and knees through sections that were barely 60 centimeters high, dragging her equipment pack behind her. The walls were rough-carved stone, originally blasted out by human mining equipment but now partially collapsed in several places. After 30 minutes of crawling, she reached the first major obstruction, a pile of rubble that completely blocked the tunnel. Sarah pulled out her plasma cutter and began carefully removing rocks, working slowly to avoid triggering a larger collapse. Each piece of debris had to be moved quietly and placed where it wouldn't roll back and block her escape route. The work was exhausting and nerve-wracking. Every sound seemed amplified in the confined space, and she constantly worried that the tunnel ceiling might give way under the weight of the mountain above. Sweat dripped from her forehead despite the cool air, and her shoulders ached from the awkward position required to operate the plasma cutter. After 2 hours, she finally broke through to the other side of the obstruction. The tunnel continued ahead, sloping upward toward the weapon emplacement. According to her calculations, she was now directly underneath the Catherian installation, with about 50 meters of solid rock between her and the surface. The final approach required climbing through a vertical shaft that led to the maintenance access for the weapon's power coupling. Sarah secured her equipment pack and began the ascent, using a magnetic grapple to pull herself up the smooth walls. Her scarred face throbbed with each movement, the old nerve damage making the left side of her face feel numb and disconnected. 20 meters up, she reached the access panel. The Catherian technology was beautiful in its complexity, organic curves that seemed to grow from the rock itself, pulsing with internal energy that cast strange shadows on the tunnel walls. Sarah placed the explosive charges at the precise locations indicated in her mission briefing, connecting them to a remote detonator that would trigger the cascade failure. The charges were small but incredibly powerful, designed to disrupt the delicate balance of forces that kept the weapon operational. When they detonated, the resulting energy feedback would destroy not just the weapon but the entire mountainside that supported it. Sarah was preparing to descend when she heard voices echoing down from above. Catherian voices speaking in their musical alien language. She froze, listening carefully to determine how many enemies were nearby and whether they had detected her presence. The voices grew louder, and she realized with growing horror that they were conducting a routine inspection of the power coupling. In a few minutes, they would discover her charges and raise the alarm. The entire mission would fail, and thousands of Marines would die in the assault. She had two choices: abort the mission and try to escape, or trigger the charges immediately while she was still in the blast radius. There was no time to climb down the shaft and reach minimum safe distance. Sarah thought about the Marines preparing for the assault, about Morrison and Webb and all the young soldiers who were counting on her to succeed. She thought about the 300 civilians she had saved at Haven Station, and the countless more who would die if humanity lost this war. She activated the detonator. The explosion was beyond anything Sarah had ever experienced. The charges detonated in perfect sequence, each blast triggering the next in a cascade of destruction that sent shockwaves through the entire mountain. The weapon's power coupling overloaded instantly, sending arcs of energy racing through the alien installation like lightning made of pure destruction. Sarah was thrown against the tunnel wall with bone-crushing force as the shaft collapsed around her. Rocks fell like rain, bouncing off her armor and filling the air with choking dust. She tried to cover her head as debris continued to fall, feeling her left arm snap under the impact of a particularly large stone. Then everything went black. She woke up hours later, buried under a pile of rubble with barely enough space to breathe. Her entire body felt like it had been trampled by a herd of angry elephants, and her left arm hung useless at her side. Blood trickled from a dozen cuts and scrapes, and she could taste copper in her mouth where she had bitten her tongue. But she was alive, which was more than she had expected when she triggered the detonator. Working with her good arm, Sarah began the slow process of digging herself out of the collapsed tunnel. Each piece of rock had to be moved carefully to avoid triggering another cave-in, and progress was agonizingly slow. She could hear the distant sounds of battle echoing from above, the crack of rifle fire, the whine of energy weapons, and the rumble of explosions. The assault had begun. After what felt like hours, she finally cleared enough debris to squeeze through into a section of tunnel that was still intact. Her equipment pack was gone, buried somewhere under tons of rock, but she still had her sidearm and a single power cell. Not much, but better than nothing. The tunnel system was a maze of collapsed passages and dead ends. Sarah had to backtrack multiple times when she encountered blocked routes, and her sense of direction was completely scrambled by the explosion. She stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the distant sounds of combat and her determination to rejoin her unit. Eventually, she found a section of tunnel that sloped upward toward what looked like natural light. Sarah climbed carefully, testing each handhold before committing her weight. The tunnel emerged onto a rocky ledge overlooking the battlefield, and what she saw took her breath away. The human assault was in full swing. Drop ships descended through a storm of anti-aircraft fire, disgorging Marines who immediately came under heavy fire from Catherian positions. The aliens had turned the mining complex into a fortress, with interlocking fields of fire that made every meter of advance cost human lives. But the destruction of the directed energy array had worked. Without that massive weapon to threaten their landing craft, the humans had been able to establish a foothold on the planet's surface. Now it was a matter of grinding forward through superior firepower and absolute determination. Sarah watched her own platoon advancing across an open field toward a series of alien bunkers. Even from this distance, she could identify individual Marines by their movement patterns and equipment loadouts. Morrison was there, moving with the deliberate care of someone who had finally realized that war was not a game. Webb stayed close to his squad leader, following orders with the mechanical precision of someone operating on pure training and adrenaline. They were pinned down by fire from a Catherian heavy weapons position, unable to advance or retreat. Sarah could see the tactical situation clearly from her elevated position. The aliens had positioned their gun emplacement to create a perfect killing field, and her Marines were caught in the middle of it. She had to help them, but she was nearly a kilometer away with no equipment and only limited ammunition. Even if she could somehow reach their position, what could one injured Marine do against a fortified alien position? Then she noticed something that made her heart race. The Catherian gun emplacement was built into a section of mountainside that had been weakened by the earlier explosion. Cracks ran through the rock face like spider webs, and she could see small pieces of stone falling intermittently. If she could cause another collapse, it would take out the alien position and free her Marines to continue their advance. But it would require getting close enough to place charges on the unstable rock face, and she had no explosives left. Sarah looked at her sidearm and smiled grimly. The power cell contained enough energy to create a significant explosion if it was overloaded properly. It would mean sacrificing her only weapon and putting herself in extreme danger. But it might be enough to bring down the cliff face. She began climbing down from her perch, moving as quickly as her injured arm would allow. The route was treacherous, requiring her to traverse loose scree and near-vertical rock faces while staying hidden from enemy observation. Every step sent waves of pain through her broken arm, but she gritted her teeth and kept moving. The sounds of battle grew louder as she approached the gun emplacement. She could hear her Marines calling out tactical information and casualty reports, their voices tight with stress but still professional. Davis was coordinating the advance, trying to find a way around the killing field without exposing his troops to additional fire. Sarah reached the base of the cliff and began looking for the best place to position her improvised explosive. The rock face was definitely unstable. She could see fresh cracks spreading even as she watched. A properly placed charge would bring down several tons of stone directly onto the alien position. She found a narrow crevice about 20 meters up the cliff face and began climbing with her good arm. The ascent was nightmarish, requiring her to wedge her feet into tiny holds while pulling herself up with damaged muscles and injured joints. Twice she nearly fell, saved only by her determination to help her Marines. At the target location, Sarah pulled out her sidearm and began the delicate process of overloading the power cell. It was dangerous work. If she made a mistake, the weapon would explode in her hands. But she had no choice. Her Marines were counting on her, just as those civilians at Haven Station had counted on her. The overload sequence would take 30 seconds to complete, giving her just enough time to rappel down the cliff face and reach minimum safe distance. She activated the sequence and began her descent, moving faster than was safe but knowing that every second counted. 20 meters down, her foot slipped on loose stone. She fell the remaining distance, landing hard on the rocky ground with her broken arm twisted underneath her body. The pain was incredible, but she forced herself to roll away from the cliff face as the power cell reached critical overload. The explosion shattered the already weakened rock face, sending an avalanche of stone crashing down onto the Catherian gun emplacement. The alien warriors had no time to escape. They were buried under tons of rubble in seconds, their weapons silenced forever. Sarah lay on her back, staring up at the alien sky and listening to the sounds of her Marines advancing through the gap she had created. She had done it again, found a way to help her fellow humans at the cost of her own body. This time, though, she wasn't sure she would survive to see the aftermath. Lieutenant Chen! She turned her head painfully and saw Morrison running toward her position, his rifle ready and his eyes wide with amazement. Behind him came the rest of her platoon, advancing with the practiced efficiency of professional soldiers. "Jesus Christ, ma'am, what happened to you?" Morrison knelt beside her, already pulling out his medical kit. "I went sightseeing," Sarah managed to croak. "How's the advance going?" "Better now that you took out that gun position. The whole line is moving forward." Morrison began applying pressure bandages to her wounds. "You saved our asses, Lieutenant." "Again." Sarah closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Her Marines were safe, the mission was succeeding, and she was still alive. It was more than she had dared hope for when she triggered that detonator in the tunnel. "Morrison," she said quietly. "Yes, ma'am. Next time someone makes jokes about my scars, tell them the truth. Tell them exactly how I got them and why." Morrison nodded solemnly. "I will, Lieutenant. I promise." 3 months after the Battle of Altair 4, Sarah stood in the assembly hall of the TDF Indomitable, her left arm still in a regeneration cast but otherwise fully recovered from her injuries. The hall was packed with Marines from the entire expeditionary force, their dress uniforms crisp and their faces solemn as they waited for the ceremony to begin. The victory at Altair had been complete. After losing their primary weapon emplacement and suffering massive casualties in the initial assault, the Catherian forces had attempted an organized withdrawal. Instead, they found themselves trapped by human orbital superiority and ground-based artillery. The battle had ended with the complete destruction of the alien fleet and the liberation of the mining complex. More importantly, intelligence gathered from captured Catherian officers had revealed the location of their primary fleet base in the neighboring star system. The war was far from over, but humanity had gained the initiative for the first time since the conflict began. Sarah's actions in destroying the directed energy array had played a crucial role in the victory, but she was uncomfortable with the attention that had followed. Military journalists wanted interviews, her commanding officers spoke of medals and commendations, and her fellow Marines looked at her with a mixture of awe and respectful distance that she found more isolating than their previous mockery. "Ladies and gentlemen, attention." The command sergeant major's voice cut through the background chatter like a blade. "General Patricia Morrison, commanding officer of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force." Sarah snapped to attention along with everyone else in the hall, surprised by the general's presence. Morrison was a legend in the Marine Corps, a 30-year veteran who had fought in every major engagement since first contact with the Catherians. She was also, Sarah realized with a start, related to Corporal Morrison from her platoon. General Morrison was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. She walked to the podium with the confident stride of someone who had faced death countless times and emerged victorious. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute command. "Marines," she began, "we are gathered here today to recognize exceptional valor in the face of enemy action. During the assault on Altair 4, one Marine distinguished herself through actions that exemplify the highest traditions of our service." Sarah felt her stomach clench as she realized where this was heading. She had hoped to avoid any formal recognition, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. Public ceremonies made her uncomfortable, especially when they focused attention on her scarred face. "Lieutenant Sarah Chen," the general continued, "volunteered for a mission that military analysts later determined had less than a 5% chance of survival. She infiltrated enemy territory alone, navigated through unstable underground passages, and successfully destroyed a strategic weapon system that was preventing our assault forces from landing." The general paused, scanning the assembled Marines. But Lieutenant Chen's actions didn't end there. When she discovered that her fellow Marines were pinned down by enemy fire, she used her own weapon's power cell to create an improvised explosive that eliminated the threat, despite being severely injured and having no support or backup. Sarah wished she could disappear into the floor. Every eye in the hall was focused on her, and she could feel the weight of their attention like a physical force. Some of the stares were admiring, others curious, but all of them made her acutely aware of her disfigured face. The actions of Lieutenant Chen saved countless Marine lives and directly contributed to the success of our mission, General Morrison continued. But more than that, she demonstrated the kind of courage and self-sacrifice that defines what it means to be human. When faced with impossible odds when any reasonable person would have sought safety, she chose to fight for her fellow Marines and for the survival of our species. The general stepped away from the podium and walked directly to Sarah's position in the formation. Up close, her family resemblance to Corporal Morrison was obvious. The same determined jaw, the same intelligent eyes. Lieutenant Chen, by the authority vested in me by the Terran Defense Force, I hereby award you the Medal of Exceptional Valor, the highest decoration that can be bestowed upon a member of our armed forces. An aide stepped forward with a presentation case containing the medal, a simple star, made of rare earth elements that gleamed like captured starlight. General Morrison pinned it to Sarah's dress uniform with practiced precision, then stepped back and rendered a perfect salute. Thank you, Lieutenant. Your courage honors us all. Sarah returned the salute, fighting back emotions that threatened to overwhelm her composure. The assembled Marines burst into spontaneous applause, their voices echoing off the bulkheads in a thunderous expression of respect and admiration. As the ceremony concluded, and Marines began filing out of the assembly hall, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow officers offering congratulations. The attention was overwhelming, and she was grateful when Sergeant Vasquez appeared at her elbow. Come on, Lieutenant, Vasquez said quietly. Let's get you out of here before the reporters show up. They made their way through the crowd to a quiet observation lounge where Sarah could finally relax. Through the viewports, she could see the reconstruction efforts on Altair 4 proceeding rapidly. Human engineering teams were already rebuilding the mining infrastructure, while Marine patrols ensured that no Catherian forces remained hidden on the planet. How do you feel? Vasquez asked, settling into a chair across from her. Tired, Sarah admitted, and confused. 6 months ago, Marines were making jokes about my scars. Now they're calling me a hero. Nothing has really changed except the stories people tell about me. Everything has changed, Vasquez corrected gently. You've shown them what real courage looks like. You've given them something to aspire to. Sarah touched the medal on her uniform, still not quite believing it was real. I just did what needed to be done. Any Marine would have made the same choice. No, they wouldn't. That's what makes you special. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression serious. Most people talk about honor and duty and sacrifice, but when the moment comes, they find reasons to let someone else pay the price. You're different. You see what needs to be done and you do it, regardless of the cost to yourself. Even when it means looking like a monster, you're not a monster, Sarah, you're a hero. And maybe it's time you started believing that. Before Sarah could respond, the lounge door opened and Corporal Morrison entered. He had traded his dress uniform for standard fatigues, and his expression was a mixture of pride and embarrassment. Lieutenant, he said formally, I wanted to apologize again for what I said in the mess hall, and to thank you for saving my life on Altair. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and something that might have been hero worship. You don't need to thank me, Morrison. We're all part of the same team. No, ma'am, I do need to thank you, because you showed me what it really means to be a Marine. Before Altair, I thought courage was about being the biggest and strongest and talking the loudest. But watching you work, seeing what you were willing to sacrifice for people you barely knew, that changed me. He paused, struggling with words. My aunt, General Morrison, she told me something when I enlisted. She said that real courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. I never understood what she meant until I saw you in action. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Your aunt is a wise woman, Morrison, and a hell of a Marine. So are you, Lieutenant. The scars on your face don't make you ugly. They make you beautiful. Because they show that you were willing to bleed for something bigger than yourself. As Morrison left the lounge, Sarah turned back to the viewport and watched the busy activity around Altair 4. Ships came and went, carrying supplies and personnel to rebuild what the war had destroyed. It was a hopeful sight, a sign that humanity was not just surviving but thriving despite the alien threat. He's right, you know, Vasquez said quietly, about the scars making you beautiful. They tell a story of courage that most people will never understand. Sarah touched her face, feeling the familiar ridges and valleys that had once filled her with shame. For the first time since Haven Station, she didn't feel like hiding from the world. The scars were part of her story, but they didn't define her entire identity. Sergeant, she said finally, what's our next assignment? Vasquez smiled. Intelligence reports suggest the Catherians are regrouping in the Proxima system. Looks like we'll have another chance to show them what humans are capable of. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar mixture of fear and anticipation that preceded every mission. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more opportunities to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. And she would be there, scars and all, ready to do whatever it took to protect her fellow humans. The war was far from over, but for the first time since it began, Sarah believed they could win. Not because humans were stronger or smarter than their enemies, but because they possessed something the Catherians couldn't understand: the willingness to sacrifice everything for each other.